My name is Tina Campt, and I am one of the fellows here at the Institute for Ideas of Imagination. And this is the second of two events that we at the Institute are hosting that are convened by the Practicing Refusal Collective under the title of the Sojourner Project. And this follows on a really amazing conversation we had yesterday evening in the Blue Clerk, a panel discussion and a screening. And we are very, very happy to continue that conversation with a reading of Dionne Brand. It will be followed by a conversation between Dionne and my co-convener, Saidiya Hartman, who is professor of English and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Columbia University. I'm going to ask her to come to the podium, and she's going to introduce our speaker for the night. Thanks.
This would be an abbreviated introduction, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's my pleasure to introduce Dionne Brand. She received her MA and BA from the University of Toronto, and she's a former poet laureate of Toronto, and we can find Dionne's words actually inscribed in the landscape of Canada, which I think is really cool. She received the Toronto Book Award for What We All Long For, and the Griffin Prize winner for Ossuaries. She received the Trillium Book Award for Land to Light On. She also received the Governor's General Award for Poetry for Light to Light On. She has been awarded many, many honorary degrees, far too many to list, and she is the author of many books. And I'm going to just read the not complete list, because when I look at the 3 books that I've written, they're like 3 decades of my life in those 3 books. So this list says much. 2018, The Blue Clerk. 2018, Theory. 2018, Luminous Ink. 2014, Love and Up. 2011, Chronicles. 2010, Ossuaries. 2006, Inventory. 2005, What We All Long For. 2002, Thirsty. 2001, A Map of the Door of No Return. A reprinting, 1999, At the Full Change of the Moon. 1997, Land to Light On. This is like reading a poem, all these titles. 1996, In Another Place, Not Here. 1998, Bread Out of Stone. 1990, We're Rooted Here. No Language is Neutral. Earth Magic Kids. No Burden to Carry. Sans Souci and Other Stories. Rivers Have Sources. Chronicles of the Hostile Sun. Primitive Offensive. Winter Epigraphs and Epigraphs. And in 2017, she published Unpublished City, a collection of young Canadian writers. And that is an incomplete list of the work of Dionne Brand. Dionne Brand is a thinker in the company of Aimé Césaire, Kamal Brathwaite, Ntozake Shange, Edward Wisson, Fred Moten, and Denise Ferreira de Silva. And like them, she writes in the porous interface of poetics. Sorry, I never double-side pages, so I'm like, what? They're double-sided? Okay. So the porous interface of poetics and critical thought. As with De Silva, the aim in Brand's work is to think otherwise, to engender new possibilities of being, to perceive the world outside and beyond the dictated terms of the brutal imagination. There is a great resonance between Towards a Black Feminist Poethic and Brand's Ars Poetica, which is published in Black Scholar, and if you haven't read that, you really should. For me, the significance of Brand's work resides in its formal experiment, the beautiful composition that is the Blue Clerk, in which you'll read tonight, enacts a complete program for disorder on its pages, pushes us beyond the terms of the given, and in its critical engagement with the economy of literary production, encourages us to imagine otherwise. Brand breaks open form to open up questions of what might be. So please join me in welcoming Dionne Brand.
Thank you very much, Saidiya. And thank you, Tina Campt, and Saidiya for inviting me, and I'm grateful to be in your good company, all of you. So I'll just read from the Blue Clerk. I won't explain, I'll just read and hopefully it will explain itself. I have left this unsaid. I have withheld. What is withheld is the left-hand page. They are chronic. I have withheld more than I have written. Evergreen and deciduous, incurable and uneasy like freight. There are bales of paper on a wharf somewhere, at a port somewhere. There is a clerk inspecting and abating them. She is the Blue Clerk. She is dressed in a blue ink coat. Her right hand is dry, her left hand is dripping. She is expecting a ship. She is preparing, though she is afraid that by the time the ship arrives, the stowage will have overtaken the wharf. The sea off the port is boiling some days, calm some days. Up and down the wharf, the clerk examines the bales, shifts old left-hand pages, making room for the swift, voluminous, incoming freight. The clerk looks out sometimes over the roiling sea, or over the calm sea, finding the horizon, seeking the transfiguration of a ship. The bales have been piling up for years, yet they look brightly stored, crisp and cunning. They have abilities the clerk is forever curtailing and marshalling. They are stacked deep and high, and the clerk in her inky garment weaves in and out of them, checking and rechecking, but they do not find their way onto the right-hand page. She scrutinizes the manifest hourly, the contents and sequence of loading. She keeps account of cubic meters of senses, perceptions, and resistant facts. No one need be aware of these. No one is likely to understand. Some of these are quite dangerous, and some of them are too delicate and beautiful for the present world. There are green unclassified aphids, for example, living with these pages. The sky over the wharf is a sometimeless sky. It changes with the moods and anxieties of the clerk. It is ink blue as her coat, or gray as sea, or pink as evening clouds. It is cobalt as good luck, or manganite as trouble. The sun is a red wasp that flies in and out of the clerk's ear. It escapes the clerk's clapping arms. The clerk would like a cool moon, but all the weather depends on the left-hand page. All the acridity in the salt air, all the waft of almonds and seed, all the sharp, poisonous odor of time. The left-hand pages swell like dunes in some years. It is all the clerk can do to mount them with her theodolite, to survey their divergent lines of intention. These dunes would envelop her as well as the world if she were not the ink-drenched clerk. Some years, the aridity of the left-hand pages makes the air pulver, parches the hand of the clerk. The dock is then a desert. The bales turn to sand, and then the clerk must arrange each grain in the correct order, humidify them with her breath, and wait for the season to pass. And some years the pages absorb all the water in the air, tumid like 400-year-old wet wood, and the dock leaps and creaks, and the clerk's garment sweeps sodden through the bales, and the clerk weeps and wonders why she is here, and when will the ship ever arrive? I am the clerk, overwhelmed by the left-handed pages. Each blooming choir contains a thought selected out of many reams of thoughts and stripped by me, then presented to the author. I am the author, in charge of the ink-stained clerk pacing the dock. I record the right-hand page. I do nothing really, because what I do is clean. I forget the bales of paper fastened to the dock, and the weather doesn't bother me. I choose the presentable things, the beautiful things, and I enjoy them sometimes, if not for the clerk. The clerk has the worry and the damp thoughts and the arid thoughts. Now where will I put that new folio, she says. There's no room where it came from. It's withheld so much about. Never mind, that will only make it worse. The clerk goes balancing the newly withheld pages across the ink-slippery dock. She throws an eye on the still sea. The weather is concrete today. Her garment is stiff like marl today. Verse 04. You can hear me all right, yeah? I don't need to move this anywhere. Yeah? Verse 04. To reverse, to turn, to bend, to plow, a furrow, a road, to turn around, toward, to traverse. When I was 9, coming home one day from school, I stood at the top of my street and looked down its gentle incline toward my house, obscured by a small bend, taking in the dipping line of a 2-bedroom scheme of houses called Mohepo, my rest. But there, I've strayed too far from the immediate intention. When I was 9, coming home from school one day, I stood at the top of my street and knew and felt and sensed, looking down the gentle incline with the small houses and their hibiscus fence, their rose bush fences, their ixora fences, their yellow and pink and blue paint washes, the shoemaker on the left up the side, the dressmaker on the lower left, the way to the bottom, the park, and the deep culvert where a boy on a bike pushed me and one of my aunts took a stick to his mother's house. Again, when I was 9, coming home one day in my brown overall uniform with the white blouse, I stood on the top of my street knowing, coming to know in that instant when the sun was in its 4 o'clock phase, and looking down I could see open windows and doors and front door curtains flying out. I was 9, and I stood at the top of the street for no reason, except to make the descent of the gentle incline toward my house where I lived, with everyone and everything in the world. My sisters and my cousins were with me. We had book bags and our 4 o'clock hunger with us, and our grandmother and everything we loved in the world were waiting in the yellow washed house. There was a hibiscus fence and a buttercup bush and zinnias waiting, and for several minutes all of this seemed to drift toward the past. Again, when I was 9 and stood at the head of my street and looked down the gentle incline toward my house in the 4 o'clock coming sunlight, it came over me that I was not going to live here all my life, that I was going away and never returning someday. A small wind brushed everything, or perhaps it did not, but afterward I added a small wind because of that convention in movies, but something like a wave of air or a wave of time passed over the small street, for my eyes and my heart could not believe my observation. A small wind passed over my heart, drying it, and I didn't descend the gentle incline and go home to my house and my grandmother and tell her what had happened. I didn't enter the house that was washed with yellow distemper that we had painted on the previous Christmas. I didn't enter the house and tell her how frightened I was by the thought I had at the top of our street, the thought of never living there, which seemed as if it meant never having existed or never having known her. I never told her the melancholy I felt or the intrusion the thought represented. I never descended that gentle incline of the street toward my house. The I, who I was before that day, went another way. She disappeared and became the I who I continued on to become, who I am. I do not know what became of her, where she went, the former I who separated once we came to the top of the street and looked down, and something like a breeze that would be added later after watching many movies passed over us. What became of her, the one who gave in so easily, or was she so surprised to find that thought that would overwhelm her so, and what made her keep quiet? When I was 9 and coming home one day, my street changed just as I stood at the top of it, and I knew I would never live there again for all my life. The thought altered the afternoon and my life, and after that I was in a hurry to leave. There was another consciousness waiting for a little girl to grow up and think future thoughts, waiting for some years to pass and some obligatory life to be lived until I had arrived here. When I was 9, I left myself and entered myself. It was at the top of the street. The street was called McGilvery Street. The number was 21. There were zinnias in the front yard. and a buttercup bush with milky, sticky pistils we used to stick on our faces. After that, all the real voices around me became subdued, and I was impatient and dissatisfied with everything. I was hurrying to my life when I stood outside of my life. I never arrived at my life. My life became always standing outside of my life, and looking down its incline and seeing the houses as if in a daze. It was a breeze, not a wind, a kind of slowing of the air, not a breeze, a suspension of the air. When I was 9, standing at the top of McGilvray Street, about to say something, I don't know what, and turning about to run down. No, my grandmother said, never run pell-mell down the street toward the house, as ill-behaved people would. So I was about to say something, to collect my cousins and sisters into an orderly file, and to walk down to our hibiscus fenced house with the yellow outer walls and my whole life inside. A small bit of air took me away. Verse 11. Because the author, she is a fiction in a certain reality, a specter in a certain dream, a haunt in a certain nightmare, since what I might be is uncontainable. The clerk, of course, understands this uncontainability. It is actually an extension of simplicity. I am so simple an idea, the clerk says. It is very complicated. We are working with something that has already been concluded. It is not necessary to experience this body within the context of what is necessary in order to know it. It is conceived of before it appears or is investigated. I can never make such a mistake when I go through the blind shipment, the clerk says. That will be fatal. The author has heard this dissertation from the clerk about the freight, about the body, but is intrigued by the former sentence about the simple idea and its complication. When I say it is simple, the clerk knows the author's penchant for first sentences. I mean, it already exists, that definition, that place you are so eager to live in. Must I be explicit? The human. It exists in the world, but it is occupied. The author is downcast. Her instruments point toward the ground, but it is occupied by me, the author asserts helplessly. The clerk, for all her vinegar, cannot listen to this without pity. The author is standing at an estuary. The clerk sees the tide is far out and the mouth of the river is dry. The 36 vertebrae of the author are about to fracture into dry pebbles. The clerk of the verso scurries through the bales on the wharf. She sweeps the gnats disturbed from their indolence aside. The wires come awake from the neighboring bales. The one she is looking for came with no wires. She manages with great care to lift a page without rearranging its contents. The clerk's face must remain indelible for this work. This page is without verbs. It is a page she intends to give to the author as a kind of balm. This page has unstable magical powers of the same type the clerk believes as, say, a situation where poison is medicine, an anti-venom. Without verbs, nothing can be done. Nothing can get in the bloodstream. There's lemongrass in it if you like. There's bitter bark too. But the page is birdless and worldless, and there's a grand arithmetic and magnetic embryos, and latitudes of where and here. Imagine the tenderness she must use, the held breath of the sea, the still dock, the tremulous veils alert, transfixed, slight flap of the leaf, her watchful hand. Do you know the butchery it requires to skin the vocal tract for the soft, perfumed sliver of an H? The velar K, the bilabial P, then to circumlocute the corona of the tongue for T and Th and S. That is the clerk's job, and then with the same professional alacrity of a slaughterer, to apprehend the constituting words and sift these for the unchastened perceptions, the incurable knowledge of who we are. The withholding pages, all their interests and their cynicisms, the volumetric capacity worries her. The clerk examines the useless curses, the stray sentences on why a life must be lived. She hurries back to the estuary and the disarticulating author. She lives in the accretion of the author's dreams. The author lives on the aggregate of the clerk's senses. I'm writing my way out of a nightmare, the author says. I am caught in a nightmare, the clerk says. Everyone knows how things get done in the world. The author is ready with excuses. The clerk turns to the author. The clerk's face is flooded with light. I don't know at all. I only know what a liquid consonant can do. The clerk is inclined not to trust the author with this page, but the page has its own poison or medicine. The verbless page leaves the clerk's fingers, floats down on the author's hands. These versos began with 3, then increased to 7, then elaborated to 9. In the space of a few days, now they are 11. The left-hand page is not only chronic, it is viral. The clerk retreats to the wharf. Now they are 59. Verso 13. Blue tremors, blue position, blue suppuration. The clerk is considering blue havoc, blue thousands, blue shoulder. Where these arrive from, blue expenses. The clerk hears humming in her ears. Blue handling, she answers. Any blue, she asks the author. Any blue nails today? Did you send me? As I asked, blue ants. The author says, blue drafts, perhaps blue virus. Blue traffic would make a sense, says the clerk. Blue hinges, blue climbing, these would go together under normal circumstances. The author actually doesn't hear a thing, the blue clerk says, under these circumstances, when the blue clerk sits in the blue clerk's place, making the blue clerk's language. Systolic blue. Any day it will be blue now. Reloading blue. Blue disciplines. The blue clerk would like a blue language, a lemon language, or a violet language. Blue arrivals. Oh yes. Verso 63, museums and corpses. Here I am singing, the clerk said. I do not know how I have survived the world. I simply do not know. I have such an ache in my back. All these laws so far only ever address one arm or one foot. Over the long term, they allocute one leg, one mouth, where one can sit, where one can eat, where one can travel, and so on. They leave me perhaps just one-legged and one-footed, one-armed, sewing our vaginas, cursing the presence of our bare heads. I do know that the bodies that we inhabit now are corpses of the humanist narrative, awful corpses. And when we appear on the street, that is what we are appearing as. So I can only give you this view of it. We inhabit these bags of muscle and fat and bones that are utilized in humanist narrative to demonstrate the incremental ethical development of a certain subject whom is not we. We leave the psychiatrist's office like the figure in Remedios Varo's painting Psicoanalista, with a little container of our true possible selves held out at arm's length in a plastic bag. My job, it seems, is to notice, the clerk says. My job, it seems, is to notice, the author says. Even as you are living, even as you are a living object, you can make a note, says the author. Look at the display I am in the world. Am I just that, you say? And you can't sustain that double scene for very long, the clerk warns. Otherwise, the body will truly collapse. The 19th century human zoos, the schisis of human bodies. That is when I left you, the clerk says. That is when I created you, the author says. That is when I created you, the clerk says. That is when you left me, the author said. It is a short step away from the present. You are exaggerating, and these exaggerations only pile up. I am exaggerating, the author says. Look at the sky, the clerk beckons. Look, there is nothing else. You are living your life. Don't be naturalistic. Why is the great Arctic the endless day, dark days, the endless daylit nights? However, if you were to stop for a minute and observe yourself, you are merely the container for a set of cultural knowledges and practices which go on without you, but which you are never without. They are like a heavy bag on you. How do I get out of this zoo? The author is not talking about a physical death, but the death of a certain kind of spiritual, if you will, the death of a certain set of narratives, the death of the aesthetic of imperialism. It is an aesthetic that contains narratives of the body, bodies that the poet suggests were dead anyway. There are then ossuaries of these dead, of which my bones are some, the clerk says. We are some, the author says. Yes, we are some. I am clinically aware. I am flying into light, that is, I am flying west, flying into the recess of light where light is ending. I have taken each detail of myself apart and placed them on the counter. These are the individual bits of evidence. I expect an arrest to be made based on these facts. Here is my heel. Here is its classification. Who is in detention except me? The commissioners and stenographers must be notified, I said. Is there no one at the desk? What will happen to my files? I'm aware, always aware, clinically aware. I went, in other words, to all commissions. I said, here is my body protected. I said, arrest someone immediately. I would like you to issue a warrant. Here is my fingernail. Send a team, a battalion if you can arrest. Seek out the perpetrators. I have given you all the evidence. Here is my signature. Nothing about me is false. I am surrendering my body to you in whole. Someone must be charged with murder, I said. Why are you hesitating? I have surrendered myself as I was advised. I am naked and I have no visions. Here, I have signed the papers. You have my authority, such as it is. The garments of glass, my shattered self. Nothing is missing. Someone is responsible. I went to the quota of mornings. I said, here, let us begin refreshed. When will the charges be heard? I asked. I am still here, blue to the heels. I insist on my innocence. I am open like a baby. I refuse cynicism on this. I will wait all night, if it takes, for the report to be handled. I can hardly disappear. The bailiff, with respect, is one of them. So is the lawyer. I have brought myself as the final forensic datum. It should be plain. Arrest someone. I have now been here for quite some time. I no longer know what language I speak or whether this is the one. I no longer exist, it seems, anywhere. Not this year. I've been here each spring, ready to leave, certain of what I can be certain of. I'll stand with verse 55. When I finally arrived at the door of no return, there was an official there, a guide, who was a man in his ordinary life, or a dissembler. Exhausted, Violet, the clerk interjects. Yes, says the author, Violet snares. He arraigned himself at the end of the story. Violet files, Violet chemistry, Violet unction. It was December. We had brought a bottle of rum, some ancient ritual we remembered from nowhere and no one. We stepped one behind the other as usual. The castle was huge, opulent. We went like pilgrims. You were pilgrims. We were pilgrims. This is the holiest we ever were. Our gods were in the holding cells. We awakened our gods and we left them there, since we never needed gods again. We did not have wicked gods, so they understood. They lay in their corners, on their disintegrated floors. They lay on their walls of skin. They stood when we entered, happy to see us. Our guide said this was the prison cell for the men. this was the prison cell for the women. I wanted to strangle him as if he were the original guide. It took all my will. Yet in the rooms, the guide was irrelevant. The guards woke up and we felt pity for them and affection and love. They felt happy for us. We were still alive. Yes, we are still alive, we said. And we had returned to thank them. You are still alive, they said. Yes, we are still alive. They looked at us like violet teas. They drank us. We said, here we are. They said, you are still alive. We said, yes, yes, we are still alive. How lemon, they said. How blue, like fortune. We took a bottle of rum from their veins. We washed their faces. We sewed their thin skins. We were pilgrims, and they were gods. They said with wonder and admiration, you are still alive. Like hydrogen, like oxygen. We all stood there for some infinite time. We did weep, but that is nothing in comparison. Thank you.
Take a moment to absorb that. Thank you. Thank you. And there's so many echoes between those versos and our discussion last night. But first, I want to ask you about the emergence of the Blue Clerk. If you would say that.
I thought of the work that, writing is a kind of negotiation between what is written and what is withheld. And I thought of examining just what is withheld. And despite the fact that I've written a lot of work, there seemed to me at that point, at the beginning of the book, still a lot of withholding on my part, for all kinds of reasons. Not all of them worthy. So one withholds for embarrassment, for shame, for one thinks this isn't done yet, this isn't quite up to some standard or other, someone's or other. One withholds also because one cannot quite articulate yet. And so I thought of this collection of the unarticulated and the withheld as piling up iteratively as one produces a single page. And then I thought, okay, so what exists? I produce as a writer the right-hand page, the rector, the correct thing. But what is on the underside of the leaf? What is unsaid, undone, and what does undo the author too, if the author were but to say it, is there. And so I think, well, who keeps this stuff? Like somehow we each have a clerk who keeps an account and a record of all that we fail to do. Because one also withholds out of failure. So all of the failings of the author are collected by the clerk. And the clerk doesn't really know why the author is handing off this stuff. Because it's heavy stuff sometimes, weighty stuff. So I thought, what would it be to write a book that was a collection of all that is left out, all that is withheld by me? And the Blue Clerk arrived.
Thank you for that. I guess, really a range of issues come to mind because there's a way that Blue Clerk standing on the dock is this timeless figure, and it's just not the author's detritus, it's just not the pages that didn't come into one individual book, but like all the pages in all the world that never made itself as part of that full accounting. And there's a way that the dialogue between the author and the clerk, is an interrogation of the economy of the book in a large sense, the economy of the colonial archive. And I wonder if you'll talk more about the breaking of form as it relates to a different accounting of the book and a different accounting of the library.
So the appearance of the clerk gave me an an interesting freedom, or a different kind of freedom, to collect, in a sense, whatever I had wanted to collect in the first place to counter these imperialist narratives, yeah? But what never became finished in some way. And so then it posed the question of what does one mean by finished and what does one mean by form, or the shape of it, what does one mean by that? And happily, this clerk really didn't care for my concerns, even that concern, right? So it simply, so that collection simply gathered itself and had a kind of compulsion, a kind of movement where I could now, or the me that was the clerk anyway, could now pour anything in any order. And that seemed a real kind of interesting thing to me, because all is order. All coloniality and imperialism is order. They write down everything, they count everything. You know, there are lists. But my clerk collects collects what's not on the list. Right? All the arguments not on the list, or breaks up the sequential into the true sequential. Right? So I suddenly had this incredible freedom of moving in and out of shape, right? And moving, touching any particular subject that I needed to, including the work of the author herself, what the author had left out of the works that had been produced anyway, but also looking at certain kinds of figures, like there's a verso on Baudelaire and Jean Duval, all that's collected in histories and knowledges about, accepted histories and knowledges about Baudelaire and Jean Duval, where I had gone to look in Benjamin's arcade to look at human zoos, but found none, but then found something about Jean Duval, and then collected all of that. And so it's very crazy making. I have no idea if I answered you. I don't know. But the method suddenly became like, I could collect all of the unfinished thoughts of the author without the imperialist proofs, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's 1,000 questions. I mean, one of the things that I love about the book, in terms of the way you do kind of break the form, is there's this wayward index in the book, which is, you know, I don't know if you, to speak about the wayward index, and then there's a poem that appears after the index, so it raises then this question of where does the book end, or, you know, more text is never supposed to appear after the index, so there's that on the level of form, but there's a way too that it seems that this attempt to break open form is about breaking open a certain conception of the subject and of time. And I would say that it puts a lot of pressure on a certain conception of the political as well. So my second question would be about verso 4 and escaping the kind of the dead carcass of the humanist narrative.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't, so verso 4 is the verso that's the kind of round, which is a kind of realization, a kind of existential moment that that 8-year-old has about the world, about how things exist simultaneously, but about how she will be separate. She is separated psychically from various kinds of visual experiences or physical ones, or even time itself.
But one of the things that I also love about the verso 4 is these like, you know, multiple becomings and multiple durations that are happening simultaneously. So when I first read that poem, there was the arrest, because it seems that it was, you know, trying to break a certain prison house of the way we process historical time, that I think also connects us back to some of the questions we were also thinking about in yesterday's panel.
Yeah. Say more.
Well, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the trajectory of this subject's becoming over time. It's not simply that in that moment of this kind of loss, there's the anticipation of something which is yet to come, there's the being in the moment which is yet to come, there's looking back at the moment which is yet to come, and it just creates this kind of richness about like the beauty of inhabiting that space, the knowledge of it, the imminence of its loss, the opening of who she'll become.
Even the desire to become the whoever she will become also. The anticipated pleasures, but also the melancholy of, both the melancholy and pleasure of who she will become, and the loss and melancholy of who she was, or who she might have been had she gone down the hill without this consciousness that arose, or this,
Not one being and not one time.
Yeah, I wanted to just represent that on the page, if you will. And it might even have another verse to it, I don't know. Like, that's the difficulty of working in the shape of thinking in time that way, is that it is so iterative. There are so many iterations and so many directions for it that I could be working on this endlessly, which is why there are 59 versos in here, and I had to sort of stop at 59 versos. But even that seemed a travesty or a betrayal of the clerk and the ways in which one collects. Which, like I'm sitting here now and I'm collecting the angle of a line of light there, and that's another thing altogether, and that red dress over there, and that red hat, and that guy at the back, and it's how to record all of that at the same time. That is how to experience, in a way, the full richness of the world in one definition. That's one,
And for you, the kind of that richness of the world, the richness of this kind of sensory and perceptual apparatus, not only does it not require verbs, it may even be antagonistic to them. So I don't know if you want to talk about the status of that, or poetics of refusal in the work, or...
Well, in another book of poems called Asuries that precedes this one, I wanted to explore, verbs are such a damaging thing, go, do, doing, telling, writing, whatever. They're so directive and definitive that I wanted to experiment in how to make sense without them. And I suppose in some senses this was also an experiment in how to live in the world being black, which is how to create another language, which I think we must. Not a language that binds us to the brutalities, but a language that imagines us actually as we are and will be, but a language that fully describes us in the present, actually. Not only a language that attends to brutality, but a language that attends to agility, which I find a very basic tool of blackness, if you will. So I wanted to do that. So I did this long experiment, about 10 pages in verblessness, which I won't read. I could, but no. So this as to how it makes sense, and there are 10 pages without a verb that seek to describe the state of black being, and it moves historically, and it moves laterally also. In the Blue Clerk, I do another experiment in metaphor, attaching a word completely unrelated to a color, like blue or violet or lemon. So I might have in the text something like lemon uprising, lemon reptile, lemon peace, lemon authority, lemon fragility, lemon touche, lemon ne pas, etc. Right? So I make a set of, because the Blue Clerk is trying, in this collection that the Blue Clerk has to do for this author who means to live in the world of brutality, then the Blue Clerk must develop a language to live outside of brutality. So I'm continuing to make these kinds of experiments.
Do I have time for one more question, Tina, or should I open up one more? More, yeah. So I won't say 1,000 things, but I'll end with one more question. And I don't know if you want to say something about the relationship between beauty and destitution in your work.
They're the same, aren't they?
I guess I just wanted to, yeah, and just, really to say more. And I guess, though, there are two poems that have the same image of, like, the zinnias and the mattress, and so...
Yeah, I forgot to read that one, but we didn't have time. I thought that particular poem talks to a moment. I'm walking along the street one day, and I see an old mattress leaned against a wall, and it's in a yard, and there are a scraggly bunch of zinnias growing too. And I suddenly feel this deep love. It is a useless, mattress, which is usually and strung up like that against this old house. It's a sign of poverty and precarity and everything else. But I have a feeling of deep affection because I lived in such a house where there was a possible mattress thrown out the door. Inside that house was a great deal of learning, richness, affection. That is the mattress we used to jump on and have a wonderful time. And I wanted to experience, so I'm experiencing this not as poverty, fragility, and precarity, but as beauty and love and fullness. And I wanted to attend to that. I think that happens that way too. I think you can make a description, a sociological description of some kind that says that's a sign of, poverty, precarity, brutality, ugliness. Then why do I sigh for it? Yeah, and I need to account for that too, because it was also a kind of crucible of intellect and knowledge and play and all kinds of wonderful things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So now...
So I want to describe it as it was, not as it would be described by those outside of it.
And that's also like the beauty of the ordinary and the everyday use, and just another kind of inhabitation.
Could you talk about that stage sometime with the gods in verse 55? What's the relationship between those gods and the Venus narrative, or is there a relationship between those, or what are the gods signifying there?
Well, the god, that is a verse about going to the Sojourner return, going to the slave castle in Cape Coast, and walking into that, the women's prison cells or the men's prison cells, and suddenly apprehending. I went with a group of friends, about 8 of us, and we walked into that room, and of course we were destroyed, in a very involuntary destruction. Yeah. That is, knowing that we would be to begin with, but walking in quite prepared, but not being prepared at all for the sense of people that inhabited those cells. But also somehow recognizing that we had survived the cell. Yeah? And so we arrived in this moment where we wanted to thank those who had sat in those cells or died in those cells or been pushed through the door out into the ship, that was transatlantic slavery. So, but there was an incredible feeling of our gratitude for surviving that voyage. We all felt it, and certainly I did. Perhaps I articulated it in this way, that there was so our gods were those dead people, not some other kind of God, but our gods were people who had died, and people who had lived through the Middle Passage in order for 400 or 500 years later that we exist and we return. And in some senses to feel it's a very, tactile and humid, and the feeling of lives lived in those cells for however brief periods they lived it. But they were making decisions also about living or dying. They were making decisions. Certainly the slave owners were making decisions about that too, but they were making decisions also. And so, in some senses, I felt all of those decisions too. And a kind of answer back from them. A marveling, like, you're really still here. You are alive. Yeah? And our repetition of that word back to them that, yes, we are still alive. Yeah, so that was what that played. So not gods in the sense of anything Marxist would know about, but, yeah. But gods in the sense of that they were our origins.
I found your diction particularly enchanting in verse 04, and I was wondering if you could talk about the relation between your performance of that poem with like this incredible pattern of really brief pauses and the intermixing of chronologies you sort of describe also.
I can't say much more than what the poem said.
Yeah. Too bad I didn't record it.
Because when you were saying, we're still alive, again, just from the other night that I seen your work, which is about, the law that can take care of an arm or a limb or a part in something like a right to exist, right? And so to just say more about that, that kind of, and that kind of existence is also the vision of it. Trying to live otherwise is also what's putting a pressure on the colonial narrative and the colonial project, because it's not, it's like you've given me all the rights I could possibly want, but still there's this thing that is more than that exceeds that, and hopefully, can actually break that structure.
And the fact is, that those rights have had to be, a friend of mine, you of course know him, Ronaldo Walcott, has a book that he's working on called The Long Emancipation, and makes a distinction between emancipation and freedom. And that emancipation is still an enclosure, and still the kind of divvying up of certain rights, or the giving out of certain an opening area, in a sense, of slavery. It's still the aftermath of slavery, that our particular selves are not, in those interpretations, are not free selves to begin with. Yeah, which seems to be basic to most people, to most other people, except these bodies that we inhabit are given out piecemeal these rights. So the right to sit someplace, the right to walk someplace. And by the way, in more recent times, we've gathered in with the new right. I don't even really get the new right. It's the old right. It's the same process of colonialism and imperialism. It's simply experiencing a new advance, if you will, right? Or a new turnaround, or a throwback, where even individual white people think they may police black bodies, right? You cannot be here, you couldn't possibly have the right to a little girl, you can't sell water, you cannot be in your own apartment, right? And we see this more and more jumping up, where individual whites are taking it upon themselves to police black bodies, which is what all of state institutions have been doing anyway, but now it is now micromanaged, right? So those state institutions have now passed on the power to individuals on the street to do that kind of policing for them. So yes, I may feel at this point in what is called history that I have the freedom. Maybe it's only, one arm. I've got, okay, you can move that arm. Oh, this limb, you can move this limb. But the basic I don't even want to say the basic right to be human, because that, as I said, that notion of the human is so implicated. Yeah, that notion of the human which comes into being during the Enlightenment, but it's at the same time that slavery is happening. So maybe we need a new kind of definition of what that thing is, what that being is. Maybe it's just being. Yeah, maybe it's just being.
Just to ask another question, I am to Dionne about something you read. I'm swimming in the relationship between the author and the clerk still, and in particular the lines you read. She lives in the accretion of the author's dreams, and the author lives on the aggregate of the clerk's senses. And so I was, and then you go on to talk about I'm writing my way out of a nightmare. The question would be, you said a lot, maybe you can't say more than you did say, but for we who are practicing refusal and endeavoring to disseminate our words into the world with the hope that somehow we will leave enough unsaid to unwork
Well, in a funny way, the book is my proposition to don't leave anything unsaid.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Or at least the clerk's point of view, because if throughout the text, the clerk and the author, or the clerk and the poet, have a real contentious relationship. The clerk is sick of the author's withholding, right, and sick of the world's withholding, really. And the clerk would like her pages to be the pages that are written, not the author's editing of the pages. Yeah, and so, but the clerk is trapped by the author because the author lives in the present. The author lives in space. The clerk lives in time. Right? And so, the clerk would like to be rid of place, and to only live in time, and to write from time. So this is the problem. If we had our druthers, then it would be only the clerk who wrote. And that would not be anything recognizable, eventually, to the author. Yeah. That is, we would be living something unrecognizable to ourselves. Is that confusing enough?
No, it's actually perfectly clear, which may say something about me. Thank you.
Thank you for your amazing words. So beautiful and inspiring. They can break open space inside oneself. But you just spoke about emancipation being part of the enclosure. But you spoke about freedom. How could you speak about freedom if you write about freedom from time, where emancipation isn't the point that freedom, where freedom is not speaking to emancipation anymore. If that makes sense.
Okay, I'm not sure if I can answer you properly, but I think that freedom exceeds emancipation. That freedom fully exceeds emancipation. Freedom denies emancipation as any kind of a tool for living, right? That, and I'm stealing from my friend Ronaldo Walcott, and both Saidiya, everyone. Tina, Saidiya, and Christina can articulate his positions much clearer than I, but emancipation still organizes where black people can be and not be, right? Freedom is quite another proposition. Yeah? And freedom is something to think about, you know, and to see how we may elaborate outside of the confines of emancipation.
We have time for a final question.
Thank you very much for the incredible text. I would like to come back to the structure of the text itself. Make me think about the Creole storytelling, and as Edouard Glissant talked about, that means that create a sense not radically, but by accumulation or in a movement or spiral. So perhaps the issue of emancipation can be reflected with that structural spiral. That means that it's a way to stand up, as Glissant said, or Couture-Tinquon said too. That means that you are coming, that's that form of the DNA, and also the way that the black men and black women are able to stand up, not to be in radical standing, but in a spiral in the time, so a way to stand up. And finally, I think there is something with emancipation that I'm interested in comparison with freedom. This is a movement in time. So it's not something, this is radical, in a sense on the modernity of the radicality, but something that is sufficing the time, and in time, creating a being which can stand, finally. I think it's, I don't know, it's meaningful for you.
No, but yes, I hear you, absolutely. Emancipation is something that states give out, right, and have given out. I mean, that word is so much attached to black peoples in the West, yeah? Freedom is something one has, and one exercises. That's my way of thinking about that. Yes, and thank you for the Glissant. I mean, I love works by people like Chemoiseau, Solibon, Magnificent, and Texaco. It's such a wonderful book, such a wonderful kind of book about a particular time, but leaping beyond the time through its language, right? I'm very committed to how language frees us. Yeah? Anyway, whatever.
The repetition, when you talk about that in poetry, the system of repetition, of accumulation, is there something about that?
Yeah, both, well, even that one must break sometimes, yeah, because it can become usual and therefore enclosing. So with verse 4, if you notice, something else happens every time. And also the narrator or the poet leaps outside of it and say, but I might have put that in much, much later, after I saw that convention in movies. Yeah? So there's the seemingly pastoral or something, but then it leaps out into the urban and modern. And so with each movement in that poem, something else is added to disrupt the movement, the very cyclical movement of it.
Thank you very much for this discussion. I was just thinking, and I hope it's not too superficial, so I'm sorry for that. But you know, you have this sentence that comes, we're still alive, we're still alive, we're still alive. And I was just wondering if there is a connection with a kind of religiosity in your way of thinking. And I was just thinking about that because I remember that the great James Cone, I had the opportunity to hear one of his speech, and he said that faith has nothing to do, with God or even transcendence, but as a black person, faith just means I am still here, we are still alive. And I wanted to know if this dimension of faith was something that was into your work, into your way perhaps of thinking, and if you have something like a kind of a religious thinking, not Christian, this is not what I mean, but kind of religiosity that is nurturing perhaps your work and your writing.
No. In some senses, that intonation that we are still alive is merely a fact. It's a fact. It is a fact that, I am here. And then if I trace that here-ness back, then they are there, right? It is just a fact. But it is an extraordinary fact. Do you know what I mean? Really think about that. It is extraordinary. And I wanted to linger in that extraordinary quality. Yeah, so that is why the lines like oxygen, like hydrogen. Yeah? There's something about just those facts, about just that here-ness that is extraordinary, and I want us to linger on it.
I think that's a wonderful place to end, by lingering on that extraordinary fact. Thank you so much for your words, thank you for the conversation, and thank you all for coming. Please.